Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make sense. Hi everyone. Today I speak with my friend Gail. She lives in Australia now, and we see each other only about once a year. I'm not going to say much more, as the chat is already quite long, so I shall let the talking do the talking. This podcast is supported by The First Layer, the 12-step workbook on working through the 12 steps in any addiction in 21 sessions. There is also a 24-day coaching and counseling program available based on The First Layer. For more information in this regard, go to www.freddy.org.za and click through from the notices at the right of the homepage. Enjoy Gail's journey. Gail, how are you doing?
Pretty good at this stage, yes.
You were a bit stressed out when you arrived,
Yes.
but you seem a bit more relaxed now.
Yes.
Seeing friends in pain is really not a nice thing, is it?
No, it's an old long-term friend, so it's just not good to see it. Yeah.
It's that feeling of powerlessness. Is you as Gail right now can't do anything for him, and it's just so. I hate that feeling where I would really love to be able to help, but I can't.
Yeah, or you can do the things you can do, but it's not. It doesn't feel like it's maybe enough. But you have to let itself take its own process. The recovery is it's a recovery of the body to health.
It is so weird that when the idea for the podcast started, and I started a list of people I would ultimately like to talk to, you were on that list. But it was like in a pipe dream. I never ever thought that I would get you in that chair to talk to you. And then suddenly you were in South Africa, and whoa, this might just happen. So I'm so glad. I never thought that this was going to be a possibility. So you are in South Africa at the moment on holiday. You live in Australia, but you are Scottish. Or do you... you kind of, as if you're not 100% sure, you are Scottish. Were you born in Scotland?
No, that's interesting. My family are all Scottish.
Yes.
I was the single daughter born in England.
Okay.
And I was raised to know that I was Scottish, because it's always very important for Scottish people not to be thought of as English.
Yes.
As you can imagine. But the truth is, I became English. And actually in my family, people would often joke and call me the Sassenach, which if you've ever had to watch Outlander, you'll understand it means the one from outside.
Okay.
Yeah. So in some respects, I had already not come from where I come from.
Okay.
When I first grew up. And that's kind of important in terms of me being a traveller.
Yeah.
My family had already left their home, so my home was never really a home as such.
And did your parents ever go back to Scotland?
We went back all the way through my childhood for holidays and things,
Okay.
but they never chose to go back and live.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did they end up in England? Or both of them Scottish? Both mom and dad?
Yeah, both from Edinburgh. Yeah. So my father worked for the Scottish Railways, and he took a promotion that brought him down to England.
He took a train one day and ended in England.
Yes.
Weirder things have happened.
Yes. And that too was interesting, because in taking that train ride, he catapulted himself into the middle class, which his family were probably more working class.
Okay.
So added to the fact I was the English one with the English accent going back to Scotland, I was also very much a middle class child with, people around me who were more blue collar and such. So it was different. I was always seen as slightly the different one.
Okay. You two children. There's a sister.
No, there was three of us. My middle sister died of cancer in 2003.
She was in New Zealand.
That's right.
Okay, I remember that. Yeah.
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 So that's what
it
made
feels
me
like
leave.
Yesterday, like the day. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I really left in the end.
Is that when you left
South Africa? I left it. Yeah, I left in 2002. It's been a while.
Oh my God, I can't believe it.
Yes.
Back to England. So there's Gail, the Scottish girl in England. Where were you? In London?
I lived near Windsor, which is about 40 miles west of London.
That's a nice area.
Yeah, no, it was a lovely area to grow up in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was growing up on the edge of London, we used to go into London for exciting times.
Ah.
Yes.
And did you grow up with any form of religion?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I went to church every Sunday. My parents are Congregationalists, which is the sort of breakaway from Presbyterianism, as far as I remember. Yes, and my family were very much involved in the church, but probably by the time I hit my teens, I remember my little Sunday school teacher taking my mum aside and saying, "Your daughter has a very interesting mind."
And so you do.
And I was already questioning, not so much the religious tenets, but I was questioning how I saw people behaving in the church.
Ah.
I thought I was seeing a lot of hypocrisy. I thought I could see a lot of, the church committees and the infighting, and they weren't necessarily behaving as they were apparently meant to. I also remember taking umbrage about communion. I had a bit of an issue about being told I was eating the flesh and drinking the blood, and so not that our church was big on communion, but so I began to question that, and probably around 14, I would think, I started a bit of a study of comparative religions.
Okay.
I was interested, so I went along to a Mormon, went to a Catholic church. I did investigate Judaism later, but I had a friend who was Jewish, and so I just was trying to get the hang of, and then got into kind of, and there's things like Zoroastrianism, and there's Hindus, and there's Buddhists, and so as a teenager I was quite interested in the role religion plays for people.
Okay. While still attending church?
Yeah, I probably attended church until I left school, until I left home, which was 18.
Okay.
Just because the family did it.
Cool. And how did your parents react to Gail suddenly questioning this, what I reckon they would like her to believe?
Yeah, no, they weren't. It wasn't as if I was out marching and I didn't sort of suddenly join the Orange people, so they weren't too worried. But there were debates around why was this the case. And I had the impression my mother was pretty much a believer, and my father was probably fairly agnostic, but went along. So no, there wasn't really a debate around that, and I didn't become a communist, so it was not such a problem.
So you went to uni in Wales?
I did. And I actually went to study economics, funnily enough, thinking about my son studying economics. And when I got there, I realised that was still probably a bit too narrow for me. So I expanded and went into study of American culture. So I moved into cultural studies, which included economics and the history of it, but it also included literature and social anthropology, and I found that it worked for me, probably if I worked my CV backwards because I became a researcher. Yeah. That essence of how people are in their culture and what makes them who they are was really interesting. And then I ended up doing more of a study in the rights of minorities or minority groups. So I ended up sort of studying Jewish American fiction. I studied feminism, not that they're necessarily a minority. I studied black civil rights, and I studied the American Indians' experience in America and such. So that was 3 years in Wales.
Yes.
That was where I learnt a love of nature and hiking in the mountains. Yes. And it's been with me sort of ever since.
That's fundamental of who you are when I think of you, yeah.
Yes. And it's actually also probably quite relevant that was perhaps the first time I was allowed to get out and hike, because with having grown up with 2 different legs and an imbalance of my leg length, and I'd had operations for it, my mother was very careful about letting me overuse my legs. Yeah. So it was the sort of start of freedom for me to be able to just get out there and use my physicality.
Okay.
So after those 3 years, the other thing was, I think it wasn't a very, very onerous degree, so it meant that I had time to do a lot of travelling in the holidays, and I sort of got to see Asia, which probably really opened my eyes. Awesome. My first trip was to across Europe to Turkey, and that would have been in 1978. People would come up to me in Turkey and pet my hair because I was so blonde, and they were definitely not. And then in, I think, 78, I travelled to Sri Lanka, which was based upon us going to the student union flight centre and saying, where can we go? Where's the farthest we can go? And they said, you can fly to Colombo. And I remember it being £60. And we were like, okay, that's great. And we came down with these flight tickets and they said, where is it? Where is Colombo? And we discovered it was off the coast, it was an island south of India. And I had the wherewithal to send off for a little brochure from the Sri Lankan Tourist Bureau. So we had a little, less than A5 brochure. And on the basis of this, we spent 6 or 7 weeks in Sri Lanka and went up to India.
Apparently it is a most fantastic place.
It was. And in 1978, I think it was classified as one of the cheapest countries in the world.
Oh, wow.
And we were met with such a great degree of friendship by the people.
Okay.
However little they had, they were very happy to share it. And I did a lot of travelling up through the hinterland as well, not just what might have been in those days the tourist resorts.
Yeah.
And went also up into southern India. And it was in the era before the Tamil Tigers. So we were very privileged probably to be able to see that part of Sri Lanka, which for many years later was not. And then by the summer of 80, which is when I graduated uni, I then had decided I was going to do my master's degree. And since I was studying American culture, it made sense to go and do it in America.
Okay.
So that was the start of me living in other countries. Wales is another country, but not quite the same, not quite as far away as America. So I went there and lived near Chicago, a couple of hours south of Chicago for a couple of years. Did my master's.
The guy that I interviewed on Saturday also lived in Chicago.
Mm.
Yeah. Is that where all roads lead?
Gosh no. I mean, I say it was 2 hours south, and it could have been another world because it was in Indiana, which in those days, and still is, a very conservative Midwestern state. And I was tasked with teaching English. That was actually in the
Were you studying at the same college?
Yeah, so I took my master's and then I did what was called a teaching assistantship.
Okay.
But essentially that meant I was an English teacher for courses for undergraduates.
Cool.
And yes, so I learned a lot because I could set them essays.
You taught them real English.
And as a result, I was able to set all the English essays that I was able to set helped me probably become a researcher because I could ask them questions, and this was 18-year-olds, ask them what they thought about abortion and gun control and Iran back in those days.
You were there for 2 years?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
And I travelled a lot in the states of America, around America. Obviously went out to the Indian reservations, went up to my one and only Black Muslim rally in Chicago, which they politely but firmly told me I was the wrong colour. So I did write my thesis on the Black Muslims, but I couldn't ever kind of get into do it firsthand. Interestingly, in both Swansea and in the States, I had a great interest in South African politics because of that interest in civil rights.
Yeah.
So I had South Africa was already on my map, but as I'm sure you would know, back in the 70s, we were trained to, if we heard an Afrikaans accent, we knew that those were bad people.
Mm.
And we were trained not to buy Granny Smith's apples, and we couldn't deal with Barclays. So we were behind the movement.
Well, good for you.
Yes.
In those days, I was still not allowed to know who Nelson Mandela was. I was so ashamed of that.
And you're younger too, so you didn't even, you would have been a bit young to know what was being fought for.
But the government was so good at keeping that information away from us.
Yes.
Because once the realization came, I'm like, I don't know who this is. And one night I kind of got the guts to say to somebody, I'm really ashamed. How could I not know? And this one, neither did I. And we discovered that none of us knew because we weren't supposed to know. Mm. So the government did a very good job in keeping that information from us.
And
it was shocking.
That is why it is so important that a generation of British students and American students and who knows whatever there are others, they did know. We did know who he was.
Yeah. So in the student days, were you still searching for a religion, searching for meaning, searching for something, or did you find what you were looking for in your school days?
I would say that I can't tell you when it would have been, but I would imagine it was sometime during that university time that I sort of formulated a theory of being I think I called it a naturalist. I just realised that I could commune with what appeared to be my God on mountaintops and in wild places, and that I felt more serene, and that I could feel more connected to a bigger thing than I ever got inside a church. And so it became, I mean, certainly as of 18 I stopped going to church. I probably continued to be interested in religions because I studied the Jewish religion more so in America, and I also was interested in the American Indians religion, which it's actually definitely very spiritual. But so for me it was beginning to be a notion of just that there is a bigger power, but it probably doesn't require the ritual, and it certainly doesn't need people to fight in its cause. For each other's ritual.
Absolutely,
So I became a bit anti the whole organised religion thing. And I probably also learnt in those university years about the notion of religion as the opiate for the masses, so that it wasn't necessarily the thinking person's thing to do either.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So after America, where did we go? I know there was a stint in Africa, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Well, no, after America, I won a scholarship when I was in America. It was called the International Peace Prize.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and I thought the best way I could use that was to go travelling and see more countries. And, and it was self-indulgent, but it was also about understanding that if you've travelled, you've seen other cultures and it helps you reflect on your own. But it also, we the travellers are the ones who have to be the more flexible, because if you've never travelled, you cannot be expected to know beyond your own culture.
Absolutely.
So for me, it was a part about living, learning. And when I got back from my travels, I did consider going into the diplomatic corps, and I also considered going into market research, which I finally did.
And where did you travel to in that time?
So in that year, I went down to Australia and New Zealand. That's where I started, because my sister was still living in New Zealand at the time. Spent about 3 months in those countries, and that's when I first saw Sydney. That was by then about 81, I think, and thought that's a city you could do business with, and just sort of tick that in the back of my mind.
So save that for later.
Yes, that's right. San Francisco had already got that tick from previous times too. And then I went up through Southeast Asia, which actually was a huge learning curve, and I spent quite a bit of time in Indonesia. Very Muslim, but also very Hindu in Bali, and really became very interested in Hindu, and spent quite a bit of time in India. We travelled, I was mostly travelling alone, but at some points my ex-boyfriend joined me. And in Ladakh we went up to, so that's on the edge of Tibet, and they have a form of tantric Buddhism, which was very interesting. I couldn't quite get my head around what it was all about, but up there they do have the whole whirling dervish notion, where the priests can go into trance. And I saw a really interesting special festival where the trancers were on the roof, and they're in circles, they'd dance in circles, a bit I realised later like Jewish Kabbalah rituals. So trying to think where I went after that. From Southeast Asia, yes, India, Ladakh, did my first trek in Nepal, and then came home from Nepal. So it was mostly, it wasn't Europe, it was mostly Asia and Southeast Asia.
So it's interesting that from what you say is that you always stayed interested, fascinated by the religious connotation to where you were. Was it because it formed such part of the culture of where you were?
Yeah, I think I probably was interested in it because I understood how it was moulding people. I could tangibly feel the difference between Bali, which was a Hindu island, and then I just had to cross the water into Sumatra, which was a Muslim, and feel the difference, the impact on me as a woman, but the difference in the vibe of the countries. And so that sort of caught my attention. I was interested to understand that some religions could make you very happy, some religions maybe not so. And I guess it's been over a long period of years. I realised that some religions are a lot harder to stick with and require a lot more of you. And probably Christianity in its nowadays form is one of the least. It's one of the easiest ones.
And were you aware at that stage of how this knowledge, how these experiences were influencing you as a person.
I knew the travelling was impacting me big time. I don't know if I especially thought the religion was. But I would say that trek in Nepal probably confirmed for me the whole rightness of being up in mountains.
Okay.
To the extent now that if I do feel like I'm not coping, that would be my preference, is to get somewhere clean and clear where I can breathe.
Because you climbed Everest.
No, I didn't climb Everest, no. But recently I did part of the Everest Base Camp Trail.
Okay, yes. I remember seeing something like that.
And back in, it had been 25 years before, that's when I had done the Annapurna circuit, which goes around the Annapurnas.
Okay.
Which was a really big hike. And it was only just recently opened back in those days. And we were doing, I was trying to cross bridges where there was missing planks and there was ropes, and
oh my god, no.
So definitely come to grips with your own mortality and also your own fears and your vertigo.
Yeah. Definitely your vertigo.
Yes. And this past trek in Nepal, I discovered a Buddhist mantra that got me over most of the swing bridges and around most of the terrifying corners, and I just chant it. And I figure, whatever that higher power is, they're not really worrying whether I'm a practicing Buddhist or not. I'm invoking help from something bigger than myself.
Yeah, oh, lovely.
So,
have you ever been into an Afrikaans tour? In NG Kerk?
No.
Yes, you were. We were at a funeral in NG Kerk.
Huh, okay, yes.
Yeah. Because one thing that Afrikaans churches can't do, according to me, is sing. I will never forget that. They do a jubilant song, and they do it la 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 la, and there's absolutely nothing jubilant about this. You're going to wake up, for God's sake.
Yes. No, well, I went to some of those storefront American evangelical.
Oh, fabulous! With those big choirs.
Yeah, big choirs, and they're getting up and the laying on of hands and the speaking of the tongues, and it's all very, very exciting.
I often wonder how I would have connected with religion had I grown up in a church with singing like that, because I love singing. And I could never relate to what they did in the Afrikaans churches. So I'm sure you could have pulled me in with happy, joyous, fabulous singing. I mean, I love those voices, those big.
Yeah.
Oh, it's lovely.
And that's the good side, because it actually releases something in us which we all share, and then you get that resonance and that vibration, which is a higher power. But Pierre and I were listening to one on the way the other day, and it was called "Fix Me Jesus If I Need Fixing." And we both said, there's the problem, because it doesn't say let me fix myself or let me empower myself. It's like, fix me Jesus if I need fixing. And it's like, no, that ain't never going to happen. Yeah. Because it's just got the wrong end of it. And that's the side of religion that becomes the opiate for the masses. Yeah. You can sit and do nothing, but as long as you absolutely pray, it doesn't strike me that that's going to work. Yeah,
definitely. And that's what I like about the concept of a higher power in recovery that I got to learn is kind of, they always said, God, as in good or direction or whatever you believe, he will move the mountain. But if you don't pitch up with a fucking shovel, it's not going to happen. And that I really like. You need to really dig in and do your bit. And the power greater than yourself will be there in support or whatever it is. But no, you can't sit on your chair and think this is going to happen. And that I like, that I can identify with. And my mother and I have such... Jaco says I bully my mom. And I suppose he's right in a way, because she's a good Christian woman who both bakes good milk tarts and all those type of things, but she doesn't do her bit.
Right, so it's a more passive...
She prays and then she worries. And the two are nearly, in my mind, contradictory to each other. And she believes that worrying is doing her bit. And Like that old dog, I'm struggling to teach new tricks because God, he doesn't get it. And I fight with her about it. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense that you lose sleep. After you've prayed, why do you lose sleep? Do something about it.
The whole current New Age thinking is that the universe can't hear positive from negative. So if you worry, I wish this wouldn't happen, I wish this wouldn't happen, they just hear the would happen. So the universe is like, okay, that's what they want to happen.
Absolutely.
So I think you've got to be quite careful with your positive thinking. Make sure it's framed in positives.
Be very, very careful what you pray for, and be very specific what you're going to ask for. That's something I learned as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So sorry, we went to complete different route there. back to, so left Naples, went back to the UK.
Yes, went back to the UK, and so I was quasi engaged to an American, and I had to decide if I was going back after the year of travelling, if I was going back to America and to get married. And I struggled with the decision and eventually didn't. I found that I understood American culture because I'd studied it intellectually, but I kind of put myself on the position of being on the edge of the football pitch at Little League. And I thought, I don't think I'll know how to be an American if I've got to be a mum and raise children in this culture. And
so you were okay to observe, but you weren't really okay to partake.
And there was probably other issues as well. But for whatever reason, I decided I wouldn't go back and settle there. So that's when I actually started my first kind of graduate career in London.
Okay.
So I'd managed to put off working for a living until I was about 24. Quite good idea.
Highly successful. Well done.
Yes. And then I took it up, and I of course was then in London in the Thatcher years, and it was the time to be in London. It was all big shoulder pads and braces and stockbrokers
and big hair
and big earrings, and we were all making a fortune and buying property.
So this is now mid-80s.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't go into the diplomatic corps and didn't yet fully go into research. What I went into was marketing, but for a travel company.
Okay.
So it continued the theme that allowed me then to work in travel for business. And I did then a lot of travelling in Spain and countries that I'd never travelled to as a child because they were a bit sort of passé for some of the English at those days. And I also then got made in charge of the African resorts, which sort of started off the whole thing about Africa. And I would also say that I watched Meryl Streep in Out of Africa, and it had a huge effect on me. I heard her say I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Ingon Hills.
Such a beautiful line, isn't it?
And I thought, I'm going there. And it was... Yeah, it was. I was going there.
Because I think of you in Africa, I think of you in Kenya. Is it? Am I right?
That's where I was first aiming for.
Okay, cool.
Yes. So I worked in London probably through the 80s until about all the way through the 80s, and then took another year off with my partner at the time.
Sorry for giggling, but it doesn't, for somebody as dynamic as you, it doesn't sound as if work was a very high priority in your life.
Well, it was kind of like I was doing it and doing it well, but I always thought this was not what life was really about.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we took the year off and we spent 4 months managing a ski resort in Verbier.
Oh, wow.
So improving our skiing and our French, hopefully, which was really good fun. It was good experience. So it was the year in which I turned 30.
Okay.
And I probably felt I was one of the older, travellers at that stage, but it was good experience. And then from there, that was where the trip through Africa started. So flew down to Harare, sat in Harare's garden on the day after we arrived, read our rough guide and looked up at each other and was like, oh my God, we needed a tent, didn't we? And we were only 9 hours away from London and we didn't have any camping gear with us. Had to spend the next 2 days trying to run to earth the most shocking South African tent that cost us hundreds of US dollars, because we wanted to go to Botswana, and it was way too expensive back in the day for us to afford to be in hotels.
What do you mean back in the day for us? Have you seen Botswana travel prices? South Africans, normal people like me, can't do it.
Yes.
There is just, unless I'm willing to go really rough, and I've never came to my life. No, it's impossible. Which is so sad.
Yeah, no, and so I feel very privileged because, again, I got to go through the Okavango Basin on a Makuru.
Oh my God, it's possibly one of the highest things on my bucket list.
It was pretty special. It was pretty good. And
And how did you travel? Train, hiking?
Everything. We travelled through buses and trains, always on public local transport. We were on a shoestring. We hitchhiked. A funny story I have was hitchhiking into the Chobe National Park, which, in retrospect, hitchhiking in a game park was of questionable validity. And we got a lift with the guys who were tasked with hunting down a lion who had just taken an animal, and they were bundu bashing and coming through and they were checking the depth of spoor and figuring out where the lion had last been seen. It was very exciting. And then we turned up in the middle of this national park, which I have to say it was probably my first interaction with South Africans, which didn't involve not eating their apples. And we were awfully grateful because these South Africans, they had beer and they had braais and they had refrigeration, and we had absolutely nothing but a tent, and they'd look at us and say, "Do you want to join us?" And they would take us out on some game, because that was one of the real problems. You suddenly realise, here I am in a game park, but I haven't got transport.
Yeah.
And that was where I learnt that the language of shaking like a leaf really can happen, because we had a baboon circling around us, and baboons sound awfully like lions, and sniffing. And I kept saying to my boyfriend, no, I read that wild animals think that tents are solid structures, except elephants. So we're okay. And he was like, don't think so. So it was a very good trip.
Sounds lovely.
Yes. And we had campfires where I remember a South African coming up saying, "Have you seen a hyena with a fridge in its mouth?" It just tore my door off.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, and we would be sitting around the campfire, and if you look behind your shoulder, you could see our eyes glinting.
Oh my word!
So, yeah, that was Chobe when it was very wild.
I would have been scared shitless.
But it was good, and we did.
It sounds wonderful.
So we went up through Malawi. We hitchhiked. We missed Mozambique because the Tete corridor still wasn't safe.
So you saw Malawi Lake.
Yeah.
Did you stay on the islands?
Yes, we were mostly
lovely.
Yeah, mostly down in the south, but travelled up through because we crossed into Tanzania that way.
Oh, whoa.
Hitchhiked across into Tanzania, got really the third degree about where's your South African stamp. We're like, we didn't go. Where is it? Have you got other paper? Did you give them a piece of paper? I said, we didn't go to South Africa.
Yeah.
And they're like, why did you not go to South Africa? For this very reason. We flew into Zimbabwe to avoid South Africa. So that was studiously avoiding
freaky
what may have become, my future life's home.
Yeah.
Went up all the way up through Tanzania, Zanzibar, up to Kenya, way up right into the sort of Samburu territory and up to Lake Turkana, which I fell in love with. Wanted to go and teach English there, but never quite made it back. Yeah, and then from there, from Africa, climbed Kilimanjaro.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Which was another, great sort of spiritual place to go for me. And from there we travelled back through America and back to England, and that was the year.
Wow, sounds absolutely amazing.
It was a really, really good trip. So we subsequently, went back and did a bit more work in England, but I was looking for something else. And I went on holiday with my cousin, who was at that stage living in Zimbabwe. I found myself at the top of the Dombashawa Hills and looking out, and I thought, yeah, it's time. I watched that movie. It's time to come to Africa. So I did. I went home. I wrote 3 letters. One was to Kenya, one was to Zimbabwe, one was to South Africa, see if I could find work. And
what year was it now?
So that would have been 92.
Okay, so things were changing. for
Yes.
us. So you were okay to come here.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. South Africa responded the next day by phone.
Oh, wow.
Said, if you can get out here and you've got the skills, we need you.
Oh, wow.
And so, yes, I did have that debate, but it was after Nelson Mandela, his release had been guaranteed and we knew 94 was coming.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I actually arrived in August of 93.
And that's when we met.
Exactly. Yes.
Because we met very soon after you virtually put your tiny little feet on South African soil.
Yes, yes. Pierre and Yuri and I were saying it's 25 years
Yeah.
since we all met. And yes, you were some of the first people I met in the country. And
What exciting times those were. Huh?
It was. And I was arriving and everyone who was certainly in the business that I was working in, they were all saying, what the heck are you doing? Why have you come here? Everyone's trying to get out. Don't you understand? We're all trying to get out. And I realised that, the people who were trying to get out needed to go, and the people who were coming in were probably going to be the right people for the countries.
And it's interesting that you arrived. Our circle was predominantly Afrikaans, gay, atheist. I think everything you wouldn't expect to find in Africa, in South Africa.
Yes, yes. And it's funny, I had no previous experience, I think, of, and atheists wouldn't have worried me, because it didn't, I would have been more worried if you'd have been staunchly voortrekkery kind of, what's that,
Yes.
reform, Dutch reform, that would have been a problem.
Cool. So then Cape Town happens.
Yes.
And that seemed to have been the beginning of a love affair.
Yeah, absolutely, wasn't it? I just fell in love, and I really did feel that Africa was my soul's home. It was a sense of belonging for the first time, and feeling it was really easy to say, this here I do want to live.
I found that in Cape Town.
Yeah.
I grew up in Johannesburg, and the Western Province were the enemy.
Right.
in sport and in everything.
Yeah,
So
okay,
I was taught to hate Cape Town, hate Cape Townians. And when I arrived in Cape Town in 93, and my soul said, you're home, it was kind of, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. This can't be home. My soul said, this is home.
I learnt later that whole notion of Table Mountain as an earth epicenter, it would have a lot of credibility. I mean, the house I bought, I felt nestled. There was Table Mountain on one side.
Well,
there was Lion's
nestled.
Head behind me. There was Signal Hill on my other side, and I felt held. Yes, held in the cradle of the mountains, and it was. Yeah, they were very happy years, and not years I was expecting really for them to end. I hadn't really ever quite thought I was leaving Cape Town. It was a good time, and I suppose it further cemented, because I had then a child to raise and think about religion, and knowing that I'd been raised going to church, what was my obligation? And I actually just ended up talking to Tiana about the God of the Mountain, and that we could imagine that that's where God is, because it's an easier concept for a child, and that that there is a connection between all things. And
How old was he when you left South Africa? Sorry for interrupting you.
Just before 6.
Okay, so he was already relatively. He had a memory of.
He was who he was by. The child is formed by. Some say 3, others say 5, but that's why he considers himself a South African.
Fabulous. Yes, we won one.
And so we spent so many weekends in nature. All the times I would go out camping with him or hiking on the mountain, and I think it was safer in those days, so I could do a lot of that on my own, and we were just often just pottering through with nature. And
so from Cape Town you settled in Sydney.
Yes.
And emotionally, spiritually, connection, so you had the connection in the back of your mind.
Yes, I knew Sydney would be an okay place to live, but the motivating force, as I remember it now, was more about my sister and her being declared with a terminal cancer. And because she had left me when I was 15, I felt I needed more time with her. But looking back, I do think I may have been at some kind of a crossroads, because I jumped out of my life, in 2 months, and made that decision and didn't realise really the ramifications. And looking back, maybe a rational decision would have been to say I could visit my sister several times, but not I could drop my life and go.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't get to New Zealand. There wasn't really enough work for me there. I got to Australia and then shuffled backwards and forwards for the last sort of year and a half of her life. So I look back and I think, well, what else was going on at that point in time? And I think it was that Tian was 5. I had realised I was probably too late to have a second child. I still hadn't found a partner, so I was going through a patch of sadness about that things were not still kind of quite aligning how I might have wished them to be. So in my mind, I had never left and I never broke faith with Cape Town, but maybe there was a part of me that thought, I should get to my family, I should support my family.
Yeah.
But I did think I was coming back the year or so later. I thought, I'd spend the time with my sister and then come home.
Yeah.
So that was the bit that you realise that when you make a decision that you don't call a decision, it can be irrevocable, because it took my life off in a tangent.
But soon after sister, Dad got ill.
Not soon. Quite a lot longer.
In my head, it feels like in very, very close to each other.
No. So my sister, as I said, she had her illness between 2-2. She died in 2-3, end of 2-3. No, the thing that came in the middle was I got married in 2004.
That's what kept you there.
That's what kept me there. That's why I didn't get home, and that's why there was a lot of unfinished business and some unresolved grief about not being able to get back to my soul's home. And for Tian too, he always thought I'd made the wrong decision by staying.
Okay.
And we don't make wrong decisions. They are the decisions, and that's how life evolves.
Yeah.
So it was a relationship that lasted 6 years, and at the end of that, I probably could have still come home, but for whatever reason, we ended up fighting a rather belligerent divorce, and the lawyer said, you can't come home here because it will be an uncontested and you'll lose everything. So I ended up staying, and because it took another 2 years, by that stage then Tian was going into high school. And it felt as if the windows and the doors kept closing. And so all I did was keep faith with him and make sure we come back every year. That was my commitment to him when he was 5. I will not lose you your country.
Fabulous.
Yes. Yeah, so that was probably the hardest and darkest part of my life, the breakup and that divorce.
And you were virtually alone. I mean, was Dad still alive then?
Yeah, no, my mum and dad were still alive in New Zealand. I was in Australia. They have always been supportive parents, so they were always there to support me. I had good friends around me. I came home to Cape Town to lick my wounds on many occasions. Yeah, so we kind of fought the divorce through 2008. 2009 February, we celebrated my 50th. And you were at that drinks at the Mount Nelson. And I was in a really good space. Yes.
So that was
a high point, and
that was the high point of my addiction. That was the
I wouldn't have known that at all.
My addiction.
I didn't know. And when it emerged later that you had a major drug problem, I was like, well, when did that happen? How could that have happened?
That was at the height of my addiction.
Ah, okay.
So, but at that stage, you were in a good place, you see.
I was, and then literally the wheels came off for me. Shortly after I went back, I discovered that it wasn't all over, because I'd had a court hearing in the December of 2008. I thought it was over and we were settling. It turned out that it wasn't, and he was going to try and drag us through the courts. So most of 2009, I was in a very high state of anxiety because, I started to feel so threatened. It was getting hideous. And, he was in pain, and that's how he responded to it. And I just was like, just let me out of this. You just have to let me go now.
Yeah.
The divorce finally came through in April of 2010. April Fool's Day, I think. And that should have been it. But funnily enough, I recognised that catapulted me into a depression of note. And it was a sense of the failure. That I had failed in something that's the most important thing. I'd failed to be a good wife. I'd failed to manage to be a mother to another stepchild. I had potentially traumatised Tian, and I'd lost my country, and I had really lost it because part of the condition of the marriage with Ray was that I had to sell the house in 2002-3, and then Cape Town went ballistic, and I couldn't actually afford to buy back in.
Oh my word!
So I'd really lost it. I'd lost my back door at that point. So I eventually found something that you may or may not have heard of called breathwork.
Yes. Oh wow.
Yes. So I found breathwork, and
oh my God, that's Powerful.
I took a whole year, the whole of 2010, I trained to be a breath worker, because to be a breath worker you must do at least 150 breaths in
Oh my God.
giving and receiving, big time. And I then, by the end of 2010, I felt like, possibly like you, that I'd almost finished with the rehab, but I wasn't ready to leave the community. So I then went on and did, the next year was a following stage of the training. So I am a qualified breath worker. I actually never practice it, and it's...
My mouth is hanging open.
Yes.
I didn't know this.
No, I got very into it. And
That was such a healing experience in my life.
Yeah.
I did it twice.
Oh, yes.
My God, it was beautiful.
Very confronting, very exposing, very going back, dealing with your pain, your original pain, finding it through your very body and your pores.
Yeah.
Yelling it out, screaming it, a lot of primal screaming.
Crying. Oh my God.
Yeah. And being physically sick, and finding out, kind of working backwards to the scene of the crime, what went wrong, where, what's caused the pain. And that big learning that it isn't really what happens to us, it's what we make of it.
Yeah.
It's what you chose to make of
Yeah.
your experiences. And obviously with breathwork, generally it's couched in a whole new age spirituality. So I got exposed to things that I had probably never chosen to know much about, more about yoga, more about spiritual beliefs, more about new age ways of seeing the world, more about energy and the passing of energy between us and between animate and inanimate things, and
That's amazing.
the frequencies of the universe, and I became a big believer, and it was a really important 2 years of my life. And again, I had then a community. There was 8 or 10 of us who went through this, who became very, very close.
I can imagine how close you get through doing that.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I suppose what eventually happened in 2012 was I felt healed enough to go back to society, as it were. And I also was realising that I had not done very much work in those years, because I'd put a lot of energy into learning. And I was
So you actually took another 2 years off.
Well, I suppose I did, really. And so I ended up thinking I need to get real about getting my finances back on track again. And I suppose going back to that secular world slightly divorced me from my connection with the universe. Yeah. So I'm probably not as spiritually connected now as I was back then.
It takes work, eh?
It's a re-education process.
We need to work on that connection. It's one of those classic things, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yes. So I feel that, the last year or so I have been aware that I should be going back and doing some more breath work, and I should be reconnecting. Going to Nepal was good for me to reconnect with my sense of where I can find God. And I had a great experience with my Sherpa, because they, again, as Buddhists, they're like a higher being. And, within the 3rd day of the trek, I knew that I had to put my life in his hands. We had to cross a landslide that had only happened 2 days before and had killed 5 people.
Oh, my God.
I had to cross this landslide or go home. And, I put my hand in his and trusted that he would get me across. And so where I'm at now is probably aware of having lost a little bit of my spirituality, and knowing that it's probably the reason that I'm more stressed and I'm more busy.
Yeah.
I get busy head. For me, it's important to get back to a spiritual practice, but I avoid it because we all do. It's easier to avoid and block, and that's when we do drink and drugs and food, whatever it might be, the things that can suppress it. I think breathwork is one of the most powerful modalities.
Oh, it was amazing.
Highly underestimated and underknown. I mean, there's a huge breathing movement, and it's becoming very hip and trendy to breathe. But breathwork is way more aggressive, more invasive, more in your face. And so it often doesn't get happening.
Yeah.
But some of the people I worked with went on to introduce breathwork into business environments, because it does break down all barriers, and there can be no artifice. Breathwork is I think is real. I mean, for whatever reason, the rebirthing. Yes, I've had these experiences of rebirth. I've met my inner child. I've understood where she felt I betrayed her, and I can now know when I'm doing it.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean I always get it right anymore, but I do it. Like in selling my house last year, I realised it was a bit like it brought back the trauma of selling the Cape Town house, and my inner child was screaming. She was like, don't want you to do this. I don't feel safe. I'm not happy about this.
You always do this to me.
Yes, and I was doing my masculine, we must just get on with this. Just button up.
Yeah.
Move it. Get on with it. Do it. And I was aware of it, but I still managed not to quite have the, whatever it is, to indulge my inner child and just say, okay, I get that.
Yeah.
All right, let's just cancel this sale and not do it. Because you're left intellectually thinking, yeah, but a parent has to be a parent, and maybe the child doesn't know right, and you're meant to go with the heart feeling.
Yeah.
Because I live a lot more in my head than in my heart, and the whole of that course was all about moving into your heart. Absolutely. And functioning from a heart space.
The reason why the teddy bear is on my bed is because I tuck him in every night. I tuck my inner child in every night. So we're busy reading Chronicles of Narnia. So every night is one chapter of Chronicles of Narnia, and I feel so close to him. It is because I kind of stopped for a while, and then I started doing codependence work. The minute I started doing codependence work, I just connected with my recovery again, and I suddenly realized that I've been neglecting him. So I got Chronicles of Narnia, and I feel so close to him. We're so in touch, and I know when I'm in touch with him, I'm just far more aware. I'm far more. I don't know what the word is, but it makes me feel really sad.
It's like that. They talk about being in alignment with the universe. That everything, when you're in flow, things will happen easily. And when you're trying to push against it, or you're not sure that's what you want to do, it won't come right.
Yeah.
And that's why as we were talking, you can't just pray and worry. You've actually got to put your energy and your vision behind it, and just be a complete force towards it. Yes, there's a moment where you have to put it out to the universe, and it may come back to you in a different form than quite you expected, but it will come right.
Listen, a last thing. No, it's not a last thing. It never is. My head doesn't work that way. Meditation?
Yeah.
There was a very ugly face being brought there.
Do you know that I'm a big fail, and I really know I shouldn't, but I can't, even in 2 years worth of breath work, and there would always be meditations at the beginning and the end of the sessions, and I'd be like twiddling my fingers and thinking shit. And then I even bought this book. So
the head is just far too...
Yes. I bought this book called Hurry Up and Meditate. And I haven't even read it. It's that bad. I really struggle to do the whole sitting and being mindful. And then my Rolfer, because I also see a Rolfer, that's a whole different thing, and he said, I think you might be beating yourself up about the sitting still and emptying your head. He said, didn't you tell me you go for like 3-week hikes?
Exactly.
I'm like, yeah. And he said, well, I think you'll find that's a meditation. So I've sort of realised that what I need to do when I'm in monkey brain mode is I just need to get out into the... Yeah. And if that's what it has to be for me, there's no fail in that.
Something like just the exercise of walking, the rhythm of walking. For me, jogging is meditative.
Yeah. I noticed that my best friend and Tian's girlfriend both gave me books to bring to Cape Town, which was their way of saying, busy, busy, busy. And I thought coming here, I would be by the mountain, I would sit, I would meditate, I would read books. What have I done? I've made it a very fretful renovation process. So I know I'm still not quite there ready yet. It's on its way. There's a big calming that's due.
But that's a nice thing about, I can't believe I say these things because it's so not the way I used to think, but this is a journey. So it's okay to not be able to do it now.
Yeah.
Because it might happen for you at some stage later.
Yes. And it does come and grab you.
Yeah.
Like when I needed it, breathwork founded me, and I knew how long I had to do it. And if I've fallen off the wagon, when it's enough of a need, I'll be back there. Or I'll be back at some sort of a modality.
Absolutely.
But it is, in the meanwhile, you do think, why are you doing this? Because it makes you not at one with the world. You sort of think, why do you go back into your monkey brains? Yeah, I live on high anxiety. So it's about making peace with who you are and tempering it at the edges, I think.
Yeah.
and not losing sight that we create our own destinies, our futures.
You have one of the most fascinating heads that I've ever met in my life. The way you absorb, but while you absorb, you attach meaning and structure. It's fascinating, and it's so natural for you.
Yes, classify and codify kind of.
Yeah, constantly, and it's very seldom that something's not in your head where it's supposed to be. It just slots in. It's fascinating.
But I guess it is that way of, then I can keep it. It is then parked carefully and under control, and I'm not as good at the feeling of the heart feelings.
Yeah,
I get fear and excitement easily mixed up.
Okay,
yeah. And I discovered from breathwork that would go right back to a childhood of going up to hospitals, where the trip was exciting because I always got new frilly knickers or a new dress, but the fear around the hospital and what they were going to do was very scary. So I'm not very clearly wired to know when I'm excited or when I'm just frightened. So
wow, amazing. Gail,
you'll have to do some cutting and editing there.
This was absolutely awesome. It was really so fabulous. I'm looking forward to our lunch. I want to talk to you more. But thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for reminding me about things.
That's what most people say. This was a marathon chat, of which I enjoyed every moment of. I hope you did too. Like I mentioned in the introduction, we only see each other about once a year, so we miss out a lot of the details of each other's lives. Interestingly enough, much of what we talked about in this podcast was stuff of which the pertinent information became known to me only during this conversation. Again, we see how life seems to take us by the hair and drag us backwards through the bushes. Yet, with some sense of spirituality, we seem to make it through okay, with a few scars and a whole soul filled with lessons. If you have any feedback or remarks, please feel free to pop me an email at freddy.rensburg@gmail.com or connect with me on social media. It will be great to hear from you. If you want to hear more about what I do, please feel free to connect with me on my website, which is www.freddy.org.za, or find me on Facebook at www.facebook.com/freddy.org.za, or on Twitter at RensburgFreddy. Remember that Freddy is always spelled with an IE at the end. Be safe. Bye.